Anthony, Showtime, motherfucking Pettis. How could we start this podcast off without talking about anything else? I mean, you're talking about a guy who has gone through these ups and downs in his career and then steps in against the number 3 ranked welterweight in the world. A guy who has gone 5 rounds with Tyron Woodley. A guy who's gone 5 rounds with Darren Till. A guy who knocked out Johnny Hendricks. I mean, granted, you could argue that the Hendricks knockout was because, Hendricks was on his way down. But regardless, I mean, Wonderboy's extremely talented. And he beat Jorge Masvidal, by the way, who knocked out Darren Till. So, I mean, obviously very calculated. Hard to get into a stand-up battle with that guy and come out on top. Like, that's not the way that most people expected that fight to go down. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. But, I mean, if you look back, it makes sense. Because think about what those guys who hold their hands low, Conor McGregor, Darren Till, and Wonderboy, all come to mind because they hold their hands low. What do they end up getting caught with? And all the fights that they get hurt, what do they get caught with? Big, explosive movements where a lot of distance is covered and their hands are low and they can't get it up in time. I mean, when Wonderboy got dropped against Woodley, same thing, big right hand. He got dropped in both fights. Conor McGregor against a big step in overhand right. I mean, that's probably because he was more worried about the takedown. But that's why they hold their hands low in the first place, right? Because they're so gifted in the striking department that if your hands are low, you can defend against the takedown. That's the thought. But the problem with that is, I mean, when you explode into like a big overhand right the way Khabib does or the way that like Woodley throws his, and what that does, especially when you have power. I think in Conor's case, I don't think he saw it coming. I don't even think he expected it. But with like Woodley, that's coming. But when they throw that, especially when someone like Woodley throws it, it forces you to respect it because there's so much fucking power behind it. And, look at how Jorge Masvidal caught Darren Till. Big step in overhand left, right? I think it was a left. And, when your hands are down like that and someone takes this big lunging movement at you, if your response is to move backwards instead of getting your guard up, I mean, there's a good fucking chance you're going to get caught with it, especially if your hands are low. Like, not only do you have to move backwards, but you're completely relying on the fact that you're going to clear enough distance between him and you so that the punch is going to miss, right? Like, if your hands aren't up, you're not going to get him up in time. You're not going to usually get him up in time to defend. And I feel like that's one of the big weaknesses with the style that they present. And it's taken a while to figure it out, I feel like. But it seems to be these big explosive movements because like these guys, they love space. They love creating space. So when you close that space off in a quick amount of time, like that, it catches them off guard. It happened with Wonderboy. And I mean, Wonderboy bounces a lot and he was trying to move. I think he said he didn't see it coming, but he looked like he saw something coming. He was trying to move back, but that explosive movement from Pettis just covered more distance than Wonderboy was expecting, So the problem with having your hands down is like when someone, and you have to remember too that whatever they're seeing in training, like whatever they're going through, it's all amplified when a fight comes. Like everybody's energy's higher. You could, we'll talk about this in a second, but it was the same kind of deal with Curtis Blades and Justin Willis. Like you can talk about how you have DC and Khabib and Rockhold and all these animals in your training camp at AKA, and that's all true, but you can't simulate a real fight with them. You can't simulate the energy and the output and just like what it feels like to have somebody who's actually imposing their will on you because they're in a fucking fight too. Everything's amped up. So when they're covering these massive distances to try to hit you, I mean, they might be covering more distance than you're accustomed to seeing when you're in training. But regardless, that's an impressive knockout by a guy who was undersized, clearly. I mean, if you look at the fight, it's obvious who belongs at 170. And who was a little bit undersized, Wonderboy was way bigger. And when the fight started, I really liked Pettis' game plan. I thought he stayed calm. He was just walking, kept his guard up, and, just throwing some traditional fundamental things. And then when the second round kicked in, Wonderboy was getting loose and starting to tag him with things. And it was so weird because I looked at my girlfriend and I was like, Pettis needs to do something to like change the outcome of this. Like if you look at the Masvidal fight, he just stepped into it and threw something, and then like 10 seconds later, Pettis threw the fucking Showtime punch. But I mean, Pettis is going to go down as a Hall of Famer probably. look at regardless of the losses on his record, look at the wins. And this is a guy who, like I said, he's small for 170. And you know what fight I think makes a lot of sense, but it won't fucking happen? I think not Darren Till, Jorge Masvidal and Anthony Pettis should fight for the 165-pound inaugural title. Why the fuck not? If you're going to ring it in, that's a hell of a way to ring the weight class in, especially with the way that those guys just finished two of the top contenders at 170. Two guys who arguably would be better suited for the 165-pound weight class. Maybe a little, they're like Joe Rogan calls them tweeners, right? That's a perfect fucking fight. You had two underdogs go in, score these massive knockouts. They both belong at 165. I think you make it happen. Make that the title fight. It's a great fight, you know? Anyway, impressive win by Anthony Pettis. I mean, he's one of those guys, you can just never count him out. And I say this about Pettis all the time. When Anthony Pettis is, and not that he was on that whole fight, like he was getting dotted up in the second, but when Anthony Pettis is on and when he gets in a fucking rhythm and he's feeling confident, I don't care what anybody says. He's one of the most difficult fighters in the world to deal with ever. He's able to mix things up so well, and then, you know, you might think that the response is to take him down, but he's got like 9 submissions, and most of them come off his back. His guard is incredible and extremely slept on. If you look at the triangle that he hit on Michael Chiesa, just like subtle little things that he does right, like he locks the triangle up, and then Chiesa postures up, and he shifts his balance just a little bit, gets under the leg, and I mean, his jiu-jitsu is beautiful. Pettis is slept on, you know? And he is a person, though, who if you get in these gritty fights with him, you can break him. And, you know, you can kind of like, but Wonderboy, like, he that's not his style. His style is not that Tony Ferguson, Max Holloway, like, it's just not his thing. Rafael dos Anjos, like, they don't fight the same way. So, you know, I understood that Pettis was an underdog, but the fact that he was that big of an underdog surprised me. I mean, Pettis is still as game as they come, you know, and obviously now you're talking about a guy who, if he wants to stay at 170, I mean, he just knocked out the number 3 guy in the world. Where else do you put him? You know, if that's where your bar is, and he just cleared that bar, he's got to move up in the rankings, right? I don't think he deserves. I'm not saying Pettis deserves a title shot at 170, but I do think that he deserves like a hot. I think the Masvidal fight makes a lot of sense. But we'll fucking see. I don't think he's gonna fight Ben Askren because I think they're boys, right? But anyway, let's move on from Pettis.